He was a man dismissed and belittled simply because of the color of his skin. A black tenant, just another face in the crowd, trying to get by in a run-down building. His life was quiet, routine, and unnoticed, until his racist landlord decided to strip him of his dignity, evict him from the only place he called home. But what the landlord didn't know was that in his attempt to break the man, he unknowingly set the stage for his own downfall. When pushed to the brink, the tenant would rise, and in a twist of fate, make the landlord regret ever underestimating him. A chill hung in the air as the first light of dawn crept over the city skyline, bathing everything in muted shades of gray and gold. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the soft hum of distant traffic. Rows of newly renovated brownstones gleamed under the pale morning light, their fresh paint and polished railings a stark contrast to the lone, aging building at the end of the block. Its bricks were weathered and cracked, ivy creeping through the mortar like veins. A tattered "For Rent" sign hung lopsided on the rusted gate, swaying with every icy gust of wind. Inside the building, on the third floor, the faint sound of a kettle whistling broke the silence. Marcus Williams sat at his small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The dim light above him flickered erratically, casting fleeting shadows across the peeling wallpaper. His eyes were fixed on the window, where a sliver of light filtered through the cracks in the old, worn blinds. He didn't notice the cold draft sneaking through the poorly sealed edges. His mind was elsewhere. Marcus had lived in this apartment for 6 years. It wasn't perfect, far from it. The heat was unreliable in winter. The water pressure seemed to have a mind of its own, and the landlord, Raymond Darby, was more of a phantom than a fixer. But it was home, and in a neighborhood rapidly changing beyond recognition, it was one of the last places where people like Marcus could afford to stay. A sudden, sharp knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. The mug in his hands rattled against the table as he set it down and rose to his feet. His heart sank slightly. The knock wasn't the familiar rhythm of his neighbor, Mrs. Carter, who often borrowed sugar or came by to share a plate of her famous peach cobbler. This was different, impatient, curt, and commanding. He opened the door to find Raymond Darby standing there, a thick, manila folder in hand. The landlord was a wiry man in his late 50s, with slicked back hair and a perpetually sour expression. He wore a long coat that billowed slightly in the drafty hallway and expensive leather gloves that seemed out of place in the aging building. His eyes scanned Marcus from head to toe, cold and calculating. "Morning, Williams," Darby said, his voice sharp and devoid of warmth. "Got a minute?" Marcus nodded, though he felt a lump forming in his throat. "Yeah, sure. What's this about?" Darby stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the small space like an unwelcome storm cloud. He placed the folder on the table and gestured for Marcus to sit. "You've been here a while now," Darby began, his tone measured but edged with something Marcus couldn't quite place. "Good tenant, always on time with the rent. But, as you know, times are changing. The neighborhood's changing." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He knew where this was going. He had seen it happen to others on the block. "I've got plans for this building," Darby continued, flipping open the folder to reveal a stack of papers. "Big plans. Renovations, upgrades, making it a place people will pay top dollar for. Unfortunately, that means I need current tenants to vacate. Your lease is up at the end of the month, and I won't be renewing it." Marcus stared at the papers, his hands clenched into fists under the table. "You can't just kick me out," he said, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. "I've been living here for years. This is my home." "It's business," Darby replied flatly. "I'm offering you 30 days to find somewhere else. Consider it generous. Some landlords wouldn't give you that much." Marcus's mind raced. He thought of the community he had built here, the memories tied to these walls. He thought of Mrs. Carter and her cobbler, the laughter of the kids playing in the hallway, the familiarity of all. And then he thought of the rents in the newly renovated buildings nearby, the astronomical prices that made it impossible for people like him to stay in the city. "Where am I supposed to go?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking slightly. Darby shrugged. Not my problem, Williams. But I'd start looking now if I were you. The landlord gathered his papers, leaving the folder on the table. As he walked toward the door, he paused and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. Don't make this difficult. I've dealt with tenants who thought they could fight it. Trust me, you won't win. With that, he left, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of Darby's words pressing down on him like a heavy stone. As the day wore on, the news began to spread. Marcus spoke to Mrs. Carter, who had received a similar visit from Darby earlier that morning. She was already packing her things, her normally cheerful demeanor replaced by quiet resignation. Others in the building were doing the same, their lives uprooted by the landlord's plans for profit. But Marcus wasn't ready to give up. That night, as he sat at his table staring at the eviction notice, a spark of determination ignited within him. He thought of his father's words, spoken years ago, but never forgotten. When the world tries to push you down, you stand your ground. Don't let anyone take what's yours without a fight. He began making calls, reaching out to friends, community organizations, and anyone who might be able to help. He researched tenants' rights and learned about the legal protections that could buy him time. The odds were against him, but Marcus refused to go quietly. As the days passed, tension in the building grew. Some tenants were too afraid to resist and packed their belongings, while others joined Marcus in his fight. Darby, meanwhile, began applying pressure, sending letters threatening legal action and hiring workers to start minor renovations that made living conditions even more unbearable. One night, Marcus returned home to find his lock had been tampered with. He called the police, but they dismissed it as a minor incident. It was clear to him, though, that Darby was trying to intimidate him into leaving. Standing in the dim hallway, Marcus felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the people like him who were being forced out of their homes in the name of profit. He made a silent vow to fight, no matter what it took. Marcus standing in the doorway of his apartment, the eviction notice crumpled in his hand. His eyes burned with resolve as he looked out at the darkened hallway, the faint hum of the city beyond a reminder of the battle ahead. The stakes had been set, and there was no turning back. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. The weight of Darby's visit and the looming deadline consumed his thoughts. His small apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The worn sofa, the mismatched dishes in the cabinet, and even the creaky floorboards seemed to whisper memories of a life he'd built here. How could someone just take it all away? At the crack of dawn, Marcus stood at the window, staring at the city waking up. The light spilled over the skyline, touching the newly renovated brownstones and the luxury high-rises in the distance. It was a sharp reminder of the growing divide. This city no longer belonged to people like him. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at his table, his laptop glowing faintly in the dim kitchen light. He began searching for tenants' rights organizations, reading through forums and jotting down notes. One group caught his attention, Urban Justice Collective. Their mission was clear, fighting against unjust evictions and gentrification. He found their number and dialed, the phone trembling slightly in his hand. A woman's voice answered, calm and authoritative. Urban Justice Collective, this is Tanya speaking. How can I help you? Marcus took a deep breath. Hi, my name's Marcus Williams. I'm being evicted by my landlord. He's trying to force me and the other tenants out so he can renovate the building. I don't know where to start, but I need help. Tanya's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry to hear that, Marcus. Unfortunately, this is becoming more common in the city. Do you have a copy of your lease? Any documentation from your landlord? Yeah, I've got the lease and the eviction notice he gave me yesterday, Marcus replied. Good. Bring those with you. We're holding a tenants' rights meeting tomorrow evening. I'll email you the details. We'll go over your case and see what we can do. Marcus thanked her and hung up, feeling a small flicker of hope. He spent the rest of the day knocking on his neighbors' doors, urging them to join him at the meeting. Some, like Mrs. Carter, were skeptical. Marcus, honey, I'm too old to fight this. I just want to pack up and move on. she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. But others, like a young couple on the second floor, were more receptive. "We've got a baby on the way," said Jasmine, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "We can't afford to move right now. If there's a way to fight this, we're in." By the next evening, Marcus had gathered a small group of tenants willing to attend the meeting. They arrived at a modest community center, the room filled with people from other neighborhoods facing similar battles. The air buzzed with a mix of frustration and determination. Tanya, a poised woman in her early 40s with a commanding presence, stood at the front of the room. She listened intently as Marcus and his neighbors shared their stories, occasionally jotting down notes. When they finished, she addressed the group. "What your landlord is doing is called a constructive eviction. By letting the building fall into disrepair and pressuring you to leave, he's hoping you'll give up without a fight. But you have rights," she said firmly. She explained the legal protections available to them, including the requirement for landlords to maintain livable conditions and provide adequate notice for evictions. She also outlined the process for filing a complaint with the city's housing authority. "We can help you organize," Tanya continued. "Strength in numbers is key. The more tenants who are willing to stand together, the harder it will be for your landlord to push you out." Marcus felt a surge of energy as he listened. For the first time since Darby's visit, he felt like he had a chance. He volunteered to be the point of contact for his building, promising to rally more tenants and collect evidence of the poor conditions. Over the next week, the fight began in earnest. Marcus and his neighbors documented every leaking pipe, broken heater, and roach-infested corner. They took photos, recorded videos, and compiled a growing file of evidence. Marcus even managed to track down a few former tenants who shared similar stories of harassment and neglect under Darby's management. Darby, meanwhile, wasn't sitting idle. Workers began showing up at odd hours, hammering and drilling to create chaos. Notices appeared in the hallways, warning tenants of upcoming inspections that felt more like thinly veiled threats. One evening, Marcus returned home to find his electricity cut off, despite having paid his bills on time. He stormed into Darby's office the next morning, his frustration boiling over. "You think cutting off my power is going to make me leave?" he demanded, slamming a stack of repair requests onto the landlord's desk. Darby barely looked up from his paperwork, his smirk infuriatingly calm. "I don't know what you're talking about, Williams. Maybe you should call the utility company." Marcus leaned in, his voice low and steady. "You're not going to scare me off, and you're not going to win." Darby's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. "We'll see about that," he said, his tone icy. As the weeks passed, Marcus became the unofficial leader of the tenants' resistance. He spent his evenings drafting letters, attending meetings, and speaking with local reporters about their fight. The community began to rally around them, offering donations and support. But the pressure was mounting. One night, Marcus found an anonymous note slipped under his door. "You're making a mistake. Leave while you still can." The message shook him, but it also fueled his resolve. He couldn't back down now, not when so many people were depending on him. Late one evening, as Marcus sat at his kitchen table going over documents, his phone buzzed. It was Tanya. "I've got news," she said, her tone urgent. "Darby's been using some shady tactics. We've found discrepancies in his permit applications and evidence that he's been skirting housing laws. This could be the leverage we need." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. For the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. The evening air was crisp as Marcus returned from another meeting with the Urban Justice Collective. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional car rumbling by and the faint hum of a distant siren. He climbed the steps to his building, his mind heavy with the weight of the fight ahead. As he approached the front door, he noticed something unusual, a faint light flickering from the basement window. The basement had always been a place he avoided. It was dark, damp, and filled with old junk that no one dared to touch. Tenants joked it was haunted, but Marcus had never paid much attention. Now, though, curiosity pulled at him. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to investigate. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended into the basement. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the faint light grew brighter with each step. As he reached the bottom, he saw the source, a small desk lamp illuminating stacks of papers and blueprints scattered across a makeshift workspace. Marcus froze. This wasn't the forgotten clutter of old tenants. It was deliberate, organized. Blueprints of the building were pinned to the walls, with sections marked in red ink. Notes scribbled in the margins hinted at planned renovations, modern apartments, high-end amenities, luxury finishes. But it wasn't just the plans that caught his attention. There was a list of tenants' names, including his own, with dates next to them. His heart sank as he read the date next to his name, Eviction, 2 weeks. "Looks like you found my little project," a voice drawled from behind him. Marcus spun around to see Darby standing at the bottom of the stairs, a flashlight in one hand and his ever-present smirk in place. "What the hell is this?" Marcus demanded, gesturing to the blueprints. Darby stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the room. "This, Williams, is the future. My future. And unfortunately for you, it doesn't include the likes of people who don't fit the aesthetic." Marcus clenched his fists, anger boiling to the surface. "You're tearing this place apart for a quick buck? You don't care about the people who live here. We're not just numbers on your damn list." Darby chuckled, the sound cold and dismissive. "Oh, Marcus, this isn't personal. It's just business. You can fight all you want, but at the end of the day, money always wins. You're already outnumbered and outmatched." Marcus took a step forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We'll see about that. I've got people on my side, and we're not going down without a fight." Darby's smirk faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and climbed the stairs, leaving Marcus alone in the basement. For a moment, Marcus stood there, staring at the blueprints and notes. His mind raced, piecing together the implications of what he'd just seen. This wasn't just about one building. Darby was part of a larger network, a system designed to strip away communities and replace them with hollow luxury. Determined, Marcus grabbed his phone and took photos of everything: blueprints, notes, tenant lists. He couldn't afford to let this evidence slip through his fingers. The next morning, Marcus shared the photos with Tanya and the tenants. The room buzzed with anger and determination as they pored over the documents. "This is bigger than we thought," Tanya said, her voice firm. "If we can prove that Darby's violating housing laws and using illegal tactics to push you out, we have a real chance at stopping him." Jasmine, the young mother-to-be, looked up from the papers. "But what if he finds out we have these? He's not above playing dirty." Marcus nodded. "We'll have to be careful, but this is our best shot." They began strategizing, dividing tasks among the group. Some tenants would gather more evidence, while others would reach out to local officials and media outlets. Marcus, as always, took on the lion's share of the work, his resolve unshaken despite the risks. A few days later, as Marcus was leaving the building, he noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but he could feel eyes on him. He tried to ignore it, brushing it off as paranoia, but the car was there again the next day. That evening, as he walked home from the corner store, he heard footsteps behind him. He quickened his pace, his pulse racing, but the footsteps matched his speed. Finally, he turned a corner and ducked into an alley, pressing himself against the wall. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the narrow space. A man stepped into view, tall and dressed in a dark suit. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was anything but friendly. "Marcus Williams," the man said, his voice calm yet menacing. "You've been causing quite a stir." Marcus squared his shoulders, refusing to show fear. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man took a step closer. "Let's just say I represent certain interests that would prefer it if you stayed quiet." Marcus's jaw tightened. "If Darby sent you, you can tell him I'm not backing down." The man smirked, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Darby's just a pawn. "You're playing a dangerous game, Marcus. You might want to think about the consequences." Before Marcus could respond, the man turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the alley, his mind racing. The encounter only strengthened Marcus's resolve. He knew now that he was up against more than just Darby. It was a system designed to silence people like him. But he also knew he couldn't let fear stop him. Over the next few days, he doubled down on his efforts, working late into the night and rallying more support. The tenants' coalition grew stronger, their voices louder. But Darby wasn't done yet. One afternoon, Marcus returned home to find his apartment door ajar. He pushed it open cautiously, his heart pounding. Inside, the place was a mess. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered, furniture overturned. A note lay on the coffee table, written in bold, block letters. "This is your last warning." Marcus clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. He called the police, but they were dismissive, chalking it up to a random break-in. He knew better. This was a message, clear and unmistakable. Despite the intimidation, Marcus refused to back down. He met with Tanya and the tenants that evening, sharing what had happened. "They're trying to scare us," he said, his voice steady. "But we're not going to let them win. This is our home, and we're not giving it up." The room erupted in applause, the tenants more determined than ever. As the meeting ended and people began to leave, Tanya pulled Marcus aside. "Be careful," she said, her voice low. "They're getting desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." Marcus nodded, his eyes reflecting both exhaustion and determination. "I will, but we can't stop now." And as he walked home that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The building's once vibrant atmosphere now felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on Marcus. It had only been a few weeks since he first uncovered Darby's plans, but the weight of the battle seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. He no longer felt the warmth of community when he walked through the hallways. Instead, there was an undercurrent of tension, quiet glances exchanged between tenants, hushed conversations in the corners. Everyone was on edge, aware that the threat was no longer looming. It was here. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop screen casting a faint light on his tired face. He scrolled through the evidence, cross-referencing the blueprints with city zoning laws and housing codes. He had found something, an inconsistency, a legal loophole that Darby might have overlooked. If he could present this to the right people, it could buy them more time. But he knew time was running out. His phone buzzed, and Marcus glanced at it, seeing Tanya's name flash across the screen. He hadn't spoken to her much over the past couple of days, busy with research and organizing the tenants, but he had to admit he missed their late-night strategy sessions. Tanya was the voice of reason, the calm to his storm. "Marcus, we need to talk." Tanya's voice crackled over the line, laced with urgency. "Meet me in the courtyard now." He didn't hesitate. The tone in her voice was enough to make him set aside the papers and grab his jacket. As he made his way down the stairs, his thoughts raced, but he couldn't quite place why he felt so unsettled. Tanya had been a steady presence, but lately, there was something different in her demeanor, something guarded. The courtyard was empty when Marcus arrived, the distant hum of city traffic the only sound. Tanya stood near the fountain, her back to him. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her expression unreadable. "What's going on, Tanya?" Marcus asked, his voice low with concern. She exhaled slowly, looking down at her feet for a moment before meeting his gaze. "I've been doing some digging of my own, and I found something." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean? What did you find?" Tanya hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it onto the stone bench beside her. Marcus took it, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the contents, but his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Inside the folder were photographs, images of Darby, yes, but also of Tanya. Photos that captured her in places she shouldn't have been, at times when she should have been somewhere else. Meeting with Darby, shaking hands with people in suits, standing outside properties Marcus had never heard of. His stomach dropped. "This isn't possible," Marcus muttered, his fingers trembling as he turned the pages. "I had to," Tanya said quietly, her voice breaking. "I had no choice, Marcus." He looked up at her, disbelief clouding his thoughts. "What the hell is this? You've been working with him." Tanya flinched, the words stinging like a slap. "No, Look, I didn't want it to go this far, but they've been blackmailing me. They know things about my past, things I've been running from for years. I didn't have any other option." Marcus felt a rush of emotions flood through him. Anger, betrayal, confusion. "So all this time, you've been playing both sides? You've been feeding information to him?" "No, Marcus. I was trying to help, trying to protect you, protect everyone. But I'm trapped." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Marcus saw the vulnerability in her eyes. The same vulnerability that had made him trust her in the first place. He stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing to make sense of everything. But the pieces didn't fit. Nothing made sense anymore. "You don't get it," Tanya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They have my brother. They've been threatening him, saying they'll hurt him if I don't cooperate." She took a shaky breath, wiping away a tear. "I'm doing what I have to do to keep him safe. I'm sorry, Marcus. I never wanted you to find out this way." The words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of betrayal. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to steady his breath. He felt betrayed, but at the same time, he understood. Tanya had done what she thought she had to, out of fear. Fear for her brother. Fear for her own life. "I can't believe this," he muttered, his voice cracking with emotion. "After everything we've been through, after everything you've said to me, you were working with him the whole time?" "I wasn't working with him," Tanya insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I swear to you, I was trying to stop it. I was trying to get enough information to bring him down. But he's too powerful, Marcus. I'm just one person. Stop," Marcus interrupted, his voice hard. "You're telling me you've been feeding him information all along, and you think I'm just supposed to forgive you?" Tanya recoiled, a pained look crossing her face. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant for you to find out like this. I was hoping to fix things, to find a way out, but—" She trailed off, her eyes filled with regret. A heavy silence fell between them, the only sound the distant murmur of traffic. Marcus felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. He didn't know what to believe anymore. Could he trust Tanya? Or was she just another pawn in Darby's game? After what felt like an eternity, he looked up at her, his eyes cold. "You need to leave. I don't want to talk to you right now." Tanya flinched, as though his words had physically struck her. "Marcus, please, I never wanted." "Leave," he repeated, his voice flat. She hesitated for a moment longer, her eyes searching his face for some sign that he would relent. But when she saw none, she nodded slowly, a final, painful glance at him before she turned and walked away. Marcus watched her go, his heart a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion. But underneath it all, there was something else. Sorrow. He stood there for a long time, the cool air biting at his skin. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him. But as much as he wanted to turn away from it, he knew one thing for sure. Tanya wasn't the enemy. Darby was. And whatever this was, whatever web of lies she had been caught in, was just another layer of the twisted game Darby was playing. He couldn't afford to lose focus. He couldn't afford to let emotions cloud his judgment. The fight was far from over, and now, more than ever, he needed to bring Darby down. The weight of the revelation sat heavy on Marcus's chest as he watched Tanya walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the dimly lit courtyard. His mind raced, trying to process everything she had said. Betrayal, lies, fear. But beneath the anger, there was confusion, an overwhelming sense that he was missing something crucial. As the silence of the courtyard stretched on, Marcus's mind replayed every moment he had shared with Tanya. All the late-night discussions, the hours spent strategizing, the countless conversations where she had shared her hopes, her fears. How could he have been so blind? How could he not have seen that there was more to her than she had let on? His hand tightened around the folder she had left behind, the photographs of her with Darby still scattered across the pages like a twisted puzzle waiting to be solved. The evidence was clear, but what if there was more to it? What if everything Tanya had told him about her brother, about being blackmailed, was the truth? But what if she was just a pawn in Darby's game? Marcus closed his eyes, the frustration of the moment creeping up his throat like bile. He couldn't afford to second-guess himself. Not now. Not with everything at stake. The tenants, his friends, his neighbors, were relying on him. He couldn't let Darby win. He couldn't let Tanya's secrets tear them all apart. A low growl of frustration escaped him, and he stormed toward his apartment. As he passed through the hallway, he saw a few familiar faces, their gazes fleeting, avoiding eye contact as though they too sensed something had changed. A shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of the air. He slammed the door behind him, the silence in his apartment oppressive. Dropping the folder onto the table, he sank into a chair and stared at the ceiling, trying to clear his mind. What was he missing? What was the hidden truth that had eluded him? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus stood up, instinctively on guard, his senses heightened. He opened the door to find Liam standing on the other side, his face taut with anxiety. "Hey, man," Liam said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to you." Marcus gestured for him to come in, sensing the urgency in his tone. "What's going on, Liam?" Marcus asked, closing the door behind him. He was in no mood for small talk, but there was something in Liam's eyes, a flicker of fear, that made him pause. "I don't know how to say this, but," Liam started, rubbing his hands together nervously. He took a deep breath, his gaze flicking to the floor before meeting Marcus's eyes again. "I think I know why Tanya's been acting so weird." Marcus froze. The mention of Tanya's name was like a spark to dry tinder, igniting a flame of anger that flared up inside him. "What do you mean weird?" Liam shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched. "I think she's been hiding something from you. From all of us." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? What has she been hiding?" Liam's eyes darted toward the door, as if to make sure no one was listening, before he spoke again. "It's about her brother." Marcus's pulse quickened. Tanya had mentioned her brother in passing, but he never fully understood the extent of her connection to him. He had assumed it was a family bond, something genuine, something she was willing to protect at all costs. But now, the way Liam was speaking, it felt like there was more to the story. "What about him?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Liam hesitated, his fingers twitching as if he were fighting an inner battle. "I overheard something the other night. Tanya was talking to someone. I'm not sure who it was, but I heard her mention a name that wasn't her brother's. It was Darby's." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Darby." Liam nodded. "Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I heard it. She said something about her brother being in too deep, and that she was just trying to protect him from Darby. But I'm telling you, Marcus, it didn't sound right. It sounded like she was in on it, like she was working with him all along." Marcus's head spun, the words echoing in his ears. "No, that can't be true." "I don't know, man," Liam said, shaking his head. "But you need to hear it for yourself. I think she's been playing both sides, saying one thing to you, but doing something completely different behind your back. I don't know what her game is, but it's bigger than you realize." Marcus stood there in stunned silence, the room closing in on him. Everything he had believed about Tanya, about their alliance, about their shared purpose, was crumbling. What if Liam was right? What if Tanya had been manipulating him all along, feeding him just enough truth to make him trust her, but withholding the key details that would have made him see the full picture? His mind raced with questions. Why would Tanya deceive him? What was her true motive? Had she been working with Darby the entire time, using Marcus and the other tenants as pawns in a game he hadn't even known he was playing? "You need to confront her," Liam said, his voice low but insistent. "You need to find out what's really going on, before it's too late." Marcus's eyes flicked toward the door, the anger bubbling inside him, threatening to boil over. "I will," he said quietly, though his words fell hollow. He didn't know if he was ready for the truth. He didn't know if he was ready to face the woman he had once trusted, the woman he had fought beside. But there was one thing he knew. It was that he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. He had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Liam nodded, as if understanding the weight of what was about to happen. "Good luck," he said softly before walking out, leaving Marcus alone with the storm inside him. As the door closed behind Liam, Marcus stood frozen for a moment longer. His breath came in short, shallow bursts as the weight of the situation settled in. Tanya had been keeping secrets. But how deep did it go? Had she really been working with Darby? Or was there more to the story? More that he didn't know? He grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the apartment, determined to get answers. He couldn't let Tanya's lies tear him apart, not when everything was on the line. But as he walked down the hallway, a sense of unease washed over him. What if he was wrong? What if he was seeing shadows where there were none? What if Tanya truly had been trying to protect her brother, and this whole thing was a misunderstanding? But deep down, a part of him already knew the answer. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a web of lies, and he was at the center of it. The question was, how far would Tanya go to protect her secrets? And how much of it would Marcus be willing to forgive? Marcus stood outside Tanya's apartment, the cool night air brushing against his skin, but he couldn't shake the feverish heat burning inside him. He had just left Liam, and the revelation had sent his mind into a frenzy, twisting his thoughts into a chaotic mess. There was no way around it. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He knocked on Tanya's door, but the sound fell hollow, as though he were knocking on a stranger's home. There was no warmth, no comfort, just the stark, biting reality of what he now knew, or at least what he thought he knew. Tanya had lied to him. She had deceived him from the very start. The door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, usually warm and open, now seemed distant. It was as if the person Marcus had once trusted no longer existed. "Tanya," he said, trying to steady his breath, his voice strained. "We need to talk." Tanya didn't step back to let him in, didn't invite him like she always had before. Her arms crossed over her chest, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "About what?" "About everything," Marcus said, his voice rising in frustration. "About your brother, about Darby, about all the lies." Her eyes flickered, and for a moment, Marcus thought he saw a glimmer of guilt in them, but was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold resolve that cut through him like a knife. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low, yet full of warning. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then help me understand," Marcus shot back. "Why are you involved with him? Why didn't you tell me the truth about your brother? Why are you playing this game, Tanya?" For a moment, there was silence between them, heavy and suffocating. Tanya's gaze never wavered from his, but something about her expression, it wasn't just guilt. It was fear. And in that moment, Marcus realized something he hadn't fully comprehended before. Tanya was scared. Scared of Darby, scared of whatever she was hiding, and terrified of what would happen if it all came crashing down. "I didn't want you to get involved," she said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the facade of calm she was trying to maintain. "I didn't want you to get hurt. This whole thing, it's bigger than you think." The words struck Marcus like a blow. "Bigger? How? What does that mean? Why didn't you tell me, Tanya? I thought we were in this together." Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a step back, opening the door wider, and gestured for him to come inside. He hesitated, but something in her eyes told him that this conversation was far from over. Inside, the apartment was dark, except for the soft glow of a single lamp in the corner. It was colder than usual, the atmosphere thick with tension. Tanya gestured for Marcus to sit, but he remained standing, unable to shake the unease gnawing at him. "I don't know how to make you understand," Tanya began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Darby has leverage over me, over my brother. If I don't play along, if I don't do what he wants, my brother. She paused, swallowing hard, as though the words were too painful to say. My brother's life is on the line, and I can't lose him, Marcus. I can't. For a moment, Marcus felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger rising in his chest. So, what? You're willing to sell us out to protect him? To protect yourself? How long has this been going on? How long have you been working with him behind our backs? Tanya flinched, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around a coffee mug, her knuckles white. I didn't want to. I swear. I thought I could find a way out, but Darby, he's too powerful. You don't know what it's like, Marcus. You don't know what it's like to have someone control everything about your life, your choices, your family. She paused, her eyes filling with unshed tears. You don't know what it's like to feel like there's no way out. Marcus's heart clenched at the raw pain in her voice, but it wasn't enough to erase the feeling of betrayal that still lingered in the pit of his stomach. I trusted you, he said, his voice breaking, the weight of his emotions finally surfacing. I thought we were fighting this together. And now, I find out you've been lying to me from the start. I never meant for you to find out, Tanya said, her voice breaking. But now you have, and I can't undo it. I can't take it back. Marcus turned away, pacing back and forth as the flood of emotions consumed him. What am I supposed to do with this, Tanya? You're telling me that everything we fought for, it was all part of his plan? That all along, Darby's been playing us like pawns on a chessboard? She didn't answer, her gaze focused on the floor, the weight of her silence more deafening than words. Marcus could feel his anger rising, the sense of betrayal sinking deeper into his bones. But then, something happened, a sudden shift in the air, a sound, a low hum, followed by a click. And then, before he could react, the door to the apartment burst open. It wasn't just Darby that stood there. Liam was standing beside him, his eyes cold, his face hard. Tanya gasped, her body stiffening in shock. Liam, what are you doing here? The look on Liam's face was something Marcus had never seen before. It was a mix of guilt and determination, the expression of a man who had made his choice and was sticking to it, no matter the consequences. I'm sorry, Marcus, Liam said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, but I can't let you tear everything down. Marcus's eyes darted between Liam and Darby, his mind struggling to comprehend the full scope of what was happening. What the hell is going on? He shouted, the anger in his voice giving way to confusion. Liam, you're working with him. With Darby. Liam didn't flinch. I didn't want to, Marcus. But sometimes you have to make hard choices. And this was the only way out. Marcus's heart sank. The second betrayal. The one he hadn't seen coming. His best friend, his confidant, the person he thought he could trust above all others, was in on it from the beginning. And now, with Tanya's confession and Liam's alliance with Darby, Marcus was left standing in the ruins of everything he had believed in. You. Marcus began, but the words died in his throat. He didn't know how to process the betrayal, how to understand the motives behind it. Darby stepped forward, a smirk on his lips as he surveyed the room. You've been outplayed, Marcus. You and your tenants are nothing more than obstacles in a game much bigger than you realize. Tanya tried to protect you, but in the end, it's always about survival. And now, we all have a role to play. The weight of Darby's words crushed Marcus, and in that moment, everything he thought he understood about loyalty, trust, and friendship shattered. His world was unraveling, piece by piece, and he had no idea how to stop it. As the tension in the room thickened, Marcus's mind raced, searching for an escape, for a way to turn the tide in his favor. But the truth was undeniable. He was surrounded by enemies, and the people he had trusted the most were the very ones who had turned against him. The night had fallen heavy and thick over the city, the shadows lengthening as Marcus made his way through the alley behind Tanya's apartment building. His mind buzzed with a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, fear, and confusion. The confrontation with Tanya, and then with Liam and Darby, had torn his world apart. He had no idea who to trust anymore. No one. He needed answers. More than anything else, He needed to understand how everything had gone so wrong, how the people he'd cared for and fought beside had turned on him so easily. It was as though his entire existence had been turned inside out, each truth revealing a deeper, darker lie beneath the surface. And now, Tanya was missing. Her phone had gone straight to voicemail when he called earlier, and her apartment door had been locked when he tried to follow up. It wasn't like her to disappear without a word, not after everything they had been through. This wasn't just about the money or the building anymore. This was about survival. Hers is everyone's. Marcus had to find her before it was too late. As he rounded the corner to the back entrance of Darby's building, the feeling of being watched crawled up his spine. He could feel it in the air, a thick, heavy silence that seemed to stretch for miles. He stopped at the gate and looked around, but there was no sign of movement, no indication that anyone was nearby. A distant car horn honked, but the usual buzz of city life seemed muted tonight, almost as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. Suddenly, the sharp click of a lock echoed behind him. He spun around, but the moment he did, a figure stepped from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark, muted clothing. It was Darby. Marcus felt a surge of both rage and fear. Darby was the architect of everything that had been destroyed in his life, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. All of it had led them here, to this moment. "So," Darby said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "you've come to settle things, have you? What a brave little pawn you've turned into." Marcus clenched his fists. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice low but firm. "I don't care what you've done or who you think you are. This all ends with you." Darby's smile widened, and he took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You really think it's that easy? You think that after everything, you can just walk away from this? From me? From your precious tenants? From all the lies you've been fed?" Marcus swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to play Darby's game anymore. He didn't want to be the pawn. He wanted the truth, and he wanted it now. "You don't control me," Marcus snapped, his voice rising. "You never did, and you never will. I'm not your property, Darby. Not anymore." Darby's expression shifted. It wasn't anger, but something colder, more dangerous. "You should have listened when you had the chance," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You should have stayed out of it. All of this. The building, the tenants, everything. You have no idea how deep this goes to you." "Then tell me." Marcus spat. "Tell me everything, and let's see where your little game takes us. Because right now, I'm not afraid of you anymore." Darby stepped closer, and for a moment, it looked as if he might strike. But then, just as quickly, he pulled back and chuckled to himself. "You still don't get it, do you? You're already too far gone. The game's over, Marcus. The people you trust, the people you thought were on your side, they're all in it too. Everyone." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, but before he could process them, Darby continued. "It's all a scheme, a plan. And now that you've involved yourself, you're part of it too. You're just too blind to see it." He tilted his head as though savoring the moment. "But it's not your fault. You were never meant to understand. You were just a tool, a means to an end." Marcus's breath caught in his throat, and he took a step back, his heart racing. "What are you talking about? You?" But before he could finish, a sharp sound cut through the air, the unmistakable click of a gun. Tanya stepped into the alley, her eyes hard, her hand steady as she pointed a sleek, silver handgun directly at Marcus. Her gaze was cold, unrecognizable. "Tanya." Marcus whispered, his voice trembling, disbelief washing over him. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm sorry, Marcus," Tanya said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I didn't have a choice." The gun trembled slightly in her hands, but she didn't lower it. "I tried to protect you. I really did. But there's no way out of this, not anymore. Not for any of us." Marcus's mind raced. The twist, the second betrayal, hit him harder than the first. Tanya, the woman he thought he knew, was part of this. She had played him, manipulated him, just as much as Darby had. "Don't do this," Marcus said, his voice breaking as he stepped toward her. "Please." "I thought." I thought we were in this together." Tanya's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she shook her head. "I didn't want it to be this way. I never wanted you to get hurt, but I have no choice, Marcus. Darby, he is my brother, and I can't lose him. I can't lose anyone else. Please understand." The desperation in her voice broke through his anger, but it wasn't enough to quell the betrayal that cut through him like a blade. His heart shattered as the truth became clearer and clearer. He had been living in a house of cards, a carefully constructed web of lies that had been unraveling around him, piece by piece. "You think I don't understand?" Marcus said through gritted teeth, his hand clenched into a fist. "I understand more than you think, Tanya, but I can't let you do this. I can't let you be a part of this anymore." Tanya hesitated, the gun shaking in her hands as tears welled in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt you, Marcus. I never wanted to be like this." But just as the words escaped her lips, Darby's voice cut through the tension. "Enough," he commanded, his tone sharp. "No more sentimentality. You've made your choice, Tanya. Now, Marcus, you need to make yours." A slow, tense silence filled the alley as the weight of the moment settled over them. The truth, each part of it, was finally laid bare, and Marcus understood, with chilling clarity, just how much had been lost. But the question remained. Could he still find a way to win, or was it too late to turn the tide? The world around him felt like it was slipping away, but there was one thing he knew for certain. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. His hands clenched, the pulse in his neck throbbing as he stood before Tanya, the woman he loved, and Darby, the man who had destroyed everything. It was now or never. The sound of heavy rain echoed down the alley, its steady rhythm almost mocking the tension that still hung thick in the air. The city had always felt alive, vibrant, full of possibility. But tonight, it felt cold, distant. The glow from the streetlights caught the wet pavement in shimmering reflections, creating a surreal atmosphere that mirrored the twisted reality Marcus now faced. His heart raced, adrenaline still coursing through his veins as he stood in the eye of the storm, facing Tanya with the gun trembling in her hands. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain and the distant hum of the city, as though the world had paused to take a breath. "Marcus," Tanya whispered, her voice fragile, breaking under the weight of the decisions she had made. "I didn't want any of this. You have to believe me." Marcus's chest tightened. Every word she said felt like it carried a shard of truth, but it was a truth wrapped in layers of deceit. He had trusted her, he had loved her, and now he was standing here, caught between the woman who had once been everything to him and the man who had orchestrated this entire mess. "You didn't want it," he echoed bitterly, his voice raw. "You didn't want it, but you still chose to be part of it. You chose him over me. Tanya, you chose Darby. After everything we've been through, after everything we've shared, you chose him." Tanya's hand shook, the gun still aimed at him, but there was no fire in her eyes, no fury. Just an overwhelming sadness, a deep, empty sorrow. "I had no choice," she pleaded. "You don't understand. Darby, he is my brother. He's been using him as leverage, Marcus. I had to protect him. I had to do whatever it took to keep him safe." The pieces fell into place in Marcus's mind. Tanya had been playing a part, but not the role he had thought. She hadn't been manipulating him for power or control. She had been trying to protect someone she loved, someone caught in the web that Darby had spun. But that didn't change the fact that she had betrayed him, had become complicit in the very things that had torn their world apart. "I understand more than you think," Marcus said, his voice tight with the weight of it all. "I understand what it's like to feel powerless, to want to protect the people you love. But that doesn't justify what you've done. You lied to me, Tanya. You used me." The rain fell harder now, blurring his vision, making the world feel even more distant. But amidst the storm, Marcus saw the truth clearly. Tanya had been a victim, too, but that didn't absolve her of the choices she had made. "Please," she whispered, her tears mingling with the rain. "Please forgive me." Forgiveness. The word hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise, a fragile thread connecting them in this moment of shared pain. Marcus wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that somehow they could walk away from this, that there was still a chance for them. But the damage had been done. The trust had been shattered, and nothing could ever fix that. For a long time, Marcus just stood there, looking at her. His heart ached, but it was different now. A quieter, deeper ache, the kind that came with loss, with the understanding that things could never be the same. He thought of the life they could have had, the future they might have built. But that was a dream that belonged to another time, another version of himself. "I can't forgive you, Tanya," he said softly, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Not now. Maybe not ever." The gun lowered slightly, Tanya's grip loosening as her shoulders trembled with emotion. "I never wanted this for us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to survive." Marcus nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. They had all been trying to survive, but in doing so, they had lost their way, and now there was no going back. Before he could say anything more, Darby's voice cut through the rain. "Enough of the theatrics, Marcus," he said, his voice low and menacing as he stepped out from the shadows. "The show's over." Marcus turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he faced Darby. The man who had started all of this, who had pulled every string, who had manipulated everyone in his path for his own gain. It was Darby who had forced Tanya into this impossible position. It was Darby who had orchestrated the destruction of Marcus's life. And now, Darby was standing there, looking at him with that smug, superior smile. "You," Marcus spat, his fists clenching. "You're the one who did all of this. You're the reason people are dead. People are suffering. You're the one who ruined everything." Darby chuckled, a sound that made Marcus's blood boil. "Ruin? No, Marcus. I've built an empire. I've created something that will last long after you've gone. The building, the people, the city. It's all mine to control. And you were just a stepping stone. You think this is over?" Marcus said, his voice rising. "You think you've won? That you've gotten away with it?" Darby's expression shifted, his amusement fading slightly. "You really think you can stop me now? After everything I've done, you're nothing." For a moment, there was a tense silence, both men staring each other down, the rain falling around them in steady sheets. But then, without warning, Darby's demeanor changed. His smugness turned into something darker, more calculating. "You're right about one thing," Darby said, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The rain grew heavier, drowning out the sound of his words. But Marcus's heart pounded with an intensity that blocked out everything else. He knew what Darby was planning. He knew that the final confrontation was about to happen, and this time it would be the last. For a moment, everything went still. And in that stillness, Marcus understood something. He wasn't going to let Darby win. He wasn't going to let him destroy everything. Not again. "I'm done running," Marcus said, his voice firm, his body steady. "If this is how it ends, then let it end. But you won't take another step, Darby." The world seemed to hold its breath as they faced off, the tension between them thick and palpable. In that moment, Marcus knew that the stakes had never been higher. The truth had been laid bare. The lies, the betrayals, the suffering, it all led to this. The end was near.